usually change my focus every single term when I am prepping for the next term. So the last term that had ended was about teaching my students how to create their own bots using a PRD, so a product requirement document. My learnings from last term was actually students don't really recognize the difference between a customized bot for something versus a generic GPT, which I can sort of understand. I think for me, when I was starting to learn AI, I basically couldn't tell apart anything. And it's funny to go and see their responses when they're talking about a specific bot for the course. They're just the answers is just so much better. They're specifically answering what the course does. And it's yes, that's the point of why you have a custom bot, is because it's tailored made to this specific outcome that you're looking for. So in terms of that, I think I hope that it has been really helpful for my students to recognize that actually when you are using AI, if the thing has been created for you specifically, that is exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And hopefully they also learned how to create their own bots specifically based on this one document. I think it was very surprising for them in terms of the workload that is required in order for you to actually have something that is meaningful. I mean, certainly for me, I spend too many hours a day trying to go and figure out how to go and teach using AI solely. And so that was last term. There were a lot of learnings in terms of students finding simulations to be really useful. For me, I think I recognize that there is a fundamental gap when I'm teaching business and how to help students recognize what does being competitive in the market actually mean, which is, to some extent, that is the whole point of business school, is actually to go and give you some sort of a competitive edge, whether that's through your network that you're meeting within the university, or it's the examples or the methods that someone is teaching you. So that was last term. This term, I thought about this for so long, probably too long, and then I got very stressed out. I didn't really know how I should be structuring and teaching this term. So I have two courses this term. I'm teaching business ethics and I'm teaching strategy. And for me, one of the really big things trying to explain to my students last term is AI has a specific workflow which increases productivity. This is actually what businesses are looking for, even if they're not verbalizing that. And, the research that I have been putting together is understanding that AI isn't really talked about the same way by everybody. Even though we're using the same words, we have completely different definitions of what we're talking about. So it becomes really tricky when people are saying, well, I want increased productivity. You're okay, in what way? Because the measurement, the tools that you're using, they're completely different. And the reports that are coming out based on how people are using AI is also really different. So we understand that Claude is specifically mostly for B2Bs. I can attest to that. I use Claude all the time for work. And then I test that with ChatGPT. Apparently, ChatGPT is used much more for just personal uses. And I can also understand that, I really only use AI specifically for my work, but I can see how, based on the output, why it would be very different and why one would be B2B and one would be B2C. Now, understanding what that looks like and why and what I would like my priority to be this term for my students is workflow optimization. It took me quite a long time to think through what that would look like for my two courses. Now, because I've already taught business ethics last term, there was a flow that I'm quite happy with. But changing it from a document to create a bot to understanding workflow optimization also required me to update a few things. And I kind of didn't really know what I want that to look like. So this is sort of like me updating everything and going through what this looks like for me this term teaching. In terms of what like my business ethics course, I'm still very much structuring it exactly the same. So I've just updated this. And we are now currently going into week 1 where students are going to be understanding business analysis tools. Specifically, I am interested in still this workflow of having an overview of what the students are going to be learning. Then there is a case. We go into the lesson. So this is actually like the lecturing component. And then we move into having the worksheets that accompany with the lesson based on the case that students have to pick out how to solve the problem. The problem is right here listed. So really what I'm very interested in is how everything links with each other and how that workflow is basically what work looks like. And I think that if this isn't something that people are familiar with, or ushering you from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 in order for you to get to your like final destination of going into a work meeting. This is sort of what I have found to be really useful. My students have also found to be really useful. Also, what was actually kind of surprising to me was that they can't really tell what is happening when they go into a leadership simulation, meaning that they actually think that at the very end, when they complete these worksheets and that they write these type of these pre-meeting memo, they think that's the end. They've provided a recommendation, and that's true. Most of the time when we are grading, you're being graded on some sort of like output, like, for me, there are memos based on extensive research, and then you do some sort of a presentation. Not actually recognizing that that is only a very small component to get your foot into the door for you to actually start having the conversation to get into a leadership meeting to make some decisions which have to be actionable. So for me, like that is very much what this workflow looks like currently for this business ethics class, which at the very end, students have to complete a whole series of activities where they are understanding how to implement different types of prompts to get different types of AI and then doing reflective work. So this is what I'm doing for my business ethics course. Now, in terms of my strategy course, oh my God, I really spent too many days thinking about what this looks like. One, this is a little bit harder for me to think through because the course is a flipped classroom approach, meaning that I actually start off with an online component. Then I go into the in-person teaching, whereas my business ethics course still follows that kind of very traditional. I meet with you in person, we go through the lesson, we go through the worksheet, and then you actually go into the online portion where you're completing a whole series of tasks. When you've already met me, we've gone through what we need to talk about that week. So reorganizing this took me quite a few days to think through in order for the entire thing to be up and running. So let's see what this looks like when we go into week 1. Similarly, this is something that, for my business ethics course is the same flow, except for the fact that you can see that this like online guided learning component is sort of like in the middle. So they still are working with an issue. They still have readings that are assigned to them. Then they go into the case. So this is a fictitious case that I have come up with for my students for them to go and think through. They are going to be working with this Tony's Chocolonely North American expansion for the entire term. And based on each week, whatever it is that we need to go through, we will talk about the topics inside the lecture. So these are the components of the lecture to which they need to then therefore complete their online guided learning. And then we go into the in-person lesson where actually based on all the things that they have already completed, we can actually start creating a pre-meeting memo for them to get into the leadership simulation. I don't know if this is a really good workflow. For me, the key here is to really get students to understand that workflow and understanding workflow and putting together a whole bunch of information in order for AI to do a whole series of things for you is really important. That's what keeps you competitive currently. And a lot of people are having a hard time understanding this gap of, well, workflows have to change. Workflows have to change because AI is going to go and change that productivity. And when productivity haven't really been explicitly defined by everyone in the same capacity, then we need to go and figure out, well, what does that look like when you're working in an organization? And that is, it doesn't really matter whether you are doing a strategy course versus you're doing a business ethics course. There's still a flow that has to be optimized. And it is still your job to figure out what you're doing with a whole series of information in order for you to get to the end goal, which is having some sort of actionable next steps that you're informing your team, because that is effectively like work, like the world of work. Oh, yeah, certain things have changed with AI, but then certain things haven't changed with AI because AI isn't going to go and make those decisions for us in order for us to go and proceed to the next step. So that's me currently. That's what I've been working on. I will see you at the next one.